Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's last post ceremony. My name is Troy Clayton, and joining us today from the Australian Army is Corporal Jeanette McNeely. Today marks the 79th anniversary of the sinking of the Japanese merchant vessel Montevideo Maru. When Rabaul fell to the Japanese in January 1942, more than 1,400 members of Australia's Lark Force were captured. Some 160 were killed shortly after the surrender. Later that year, on the 22nd of June, approximately 850 prisoners of war and 200 civilians, internees, were ordered by their Japanese counterparts to board the vessel Montevideo Maru. The ship then sailed for the Japanese base on Hainan Island, keeping to the east of the Philippines to avoid the Allied submarines. 8 days into the voyage, the Montevideo Maru was spotted by the American submarine USS Sturgeon. Unaware of the ship's cargo, the Sturgeon manoeuvred into position and fired its torpedoes. According to both Sturgeon's log and accounts of Japanese survivors, the Montevideo Maru sunk by the stern in roughly 11 minutes. Although the crew was ordered to abandon ship, they apparently made no attempt to release the prisoners. The loss of the Montevideo Maru remains Australia's worst maritime disaster. The ship was carrying more than 1,050 Australian prisoners, none of whom survived. Today, we remember all those who were lost in the Montevideo Maru and whose names are recorded here on the Roll of Honour. We will shortly recount the story of just one, Lance Corporal Andrew Craig Baird of the 2nd Battalion. We welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that love and support them. We also acknowledge the members of the RSL Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria, and RSL Queensland who are watching this ceremony broadcast across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection by visitors to the memorial. If you're able, please stand and join in singing the National Anthem. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn their loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit, in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight, we'll read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and on operations for more than a century. But first we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection.
Today, we remember and pay tribute to Lance Corporal Andrew Craig Baird. Andrew Baird was born in Geraldton, Western Australia on the 15th of April 1912, the son of James and Lillian Edith Baird. Baird was living in Melbourne suburb of Toorak when he enlisted in the 2nd Australian Imperial Force on the 10th of June 1940. The 28-year-old had been working as a machining expert and was initially bound for service with the Royal Australian Engineers. Whilst training at Puckalpunyal in July, however, he was posted to the 2nd 22nd Battalion. After a brief stay in hospital with pharyngitis, in September he was promoted to acting corporal. After another brief stay in hospital in November, this time with the mumps, Acting Corporal Baird's New Year's celebration saw him absent without leave, and he received a fine for the trouble. In mid-January, there was another disciplinary infraction, and Baird was confined to barracks for the day for having disobeyed a lawful command. In March 1941, Baird and his battalion travelled by train to Sydney, embarking aboard the troop ship HMT Katoomba, bound for overseas service. Baird's confrontation with authority continued. During the journey to Rabaul, he was punished for making statements subversive to military discipline and the morale of the unit. Regardless, having arrived in Rabaul in late March, on the 12th of April, he was appointed Lance Corporal. At Rabaul, Baird and his comrades formed the core of Lark Force, combining with local unit of the New Guinea Volunteer Rifles, a coastal defence battery, an anti-aircraft battery, and elements of the 2nd 10 Field Ambulance and the 17th Anti-Tank Battery. Lark Force was later also supported by No. 24 Squadron, Royal Australian Air Force. Lark Force's role was to protect the airfields of Lakani and Bunakanu and the seaplane base at Rabaul, as well as provide early warning of Japanese movements through the islands to Australia's north. Like the other bird forces deployed to Australia's north, Lark Force was small, ill-equipped and likely to be overwhelmed by enemy attack. The first air attacks on Rabaul began on the 4th of January 1942. Within days, the Japanese had succeeded in destroying the bulk of the defending aircraft, while further attacks targeted shipping in the harbour and shore installations. By the morning of the 22nd of January, 24 Squadron was virtually destroyed and its 3 remaining aircraft were withdrawn. With no use for the airstrips, both were destroyed and Lark Force withdrew, waiting on the western shores of Blanche Bay for the inevitable Japanese landings. The invasion began on the 23rd of January. By 9 a.m, communication failures and overwhelming Japanese strength had destroyed the cohesion of the Australian defence. After the Lark Force commander ordered a withdrawal that morning on the basis of every man for himself, Lark Force disintegrated. Groups of men ranging from company strength down to pairs and individuals sought escape along New Britain's north and south coasts. Some found small boats and escaped, while others were picked up by large vessels operating from New Guinea. Around 400 members of Lark Force managed to return to Australia, 300 of which were members of the 2nd 22nd Battalion. A grisly fate awaited those who were captured. On the 4th of February, a group of 160 were massacred at the Toll Plantation shortly after their surrender. Baird was lucky enough to avoid this fate. He was captured and became a prisoner of war, initially held at Rabaul before being among the group of approximately 850 prisoners and 200 civilian internees, ordered to board the Montevideo Maru on the morning of the 22nd of June. The Montevideo Maru sailed unescorted for Hainan Island, keeping to the east of the Philippines in an effort to avoid Allied submarines. 8 days into the voyage, Montevideo Maru was spotted by the American submarine USS Sturgeon, which manoeuvred into position to fire its stern torpedoes. Survivors from the Montevideo Maru's Japanese crew reported 2 torpedoes striking the vessel, followed by an explosion in the oil tank in the aft hold. The vessel sank in as little as 11 minutes. Of those aboard, barely 20 Japanese crew survived. Over 1,000 others died. According to surviving Japanese crewmen, Australians in the water sang Auld Lang Syne to their trapped mates as the ship sank beneath the waves. The sinking is considered the worst maritime disaster in Australia's history. Unaware of the ship's loss, the families of those aboard the Montevideo Maru continued to send letters in the belief their loved ones were still being held as prisoners of war. It was not until after the war had ended they had discovered their fate. With no grave but the sea, today Lance Corporal Andrew Baird is commemorated on the Rabaul Memorial. His name is listed on the Roll of Honour on my left, amongst more than 40,000 Australians who died whilst serving in the Second World War. This is but one of many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Lance Corporal Andrew Craig Baird, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Please stand for the reading of the Ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them.
We'll remember them.
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget. We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Poziere or in the low scrubber Gallipoli with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes the last post ceremony. We'd like to thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial and wish you all a very good evening. Thank you.